Welcome back to The Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited about leading and learning. I'm Kate, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Einstellung effect. Einstellung, which is German for setting or attitude, is our ability to develop a problem-solving set, or what's known as a mechanized state of mind. It's evidence of how efficient our brains are. We can encounter a problem, and once it's solved, keep retrieving that set of steps or solutions each time that same problem resurfaces. It's actually pretty beautiful. And it can be a big problem. That's the lesson of the Einstellung effect. The effect itself tells us that prior experience can actually have a negative impact when we are faced with new problems. Because when we think we know best, or that we have all the answers, we can be blind or even actively ignore better solutions. And as valuable as experience and expertise are, and always will be, they can become hurdles when novel problems present themselves. In addition to developing and retaining expertise, it is vital that today's leaders begin adding a different set of skills to their own abilities and to their teams that build on and beyond expertise. I believe that creativity is at the heart of this new need. Not only does it have the power to guard against the pitfalls of expertise, it can also flourish in its presence. This is why I'm so excited to welcome today's guest. She is an expert who has recognized and really embraced creativity as an important part of her own professional journey. So Thu, welcome. Thank you. I'd like to ask you to take a moment to introduce yourself, please.
Hi, thank you, Kate, for that wonderful introduction. My name is Thu, and I am a pharmacist. I am currently working in a hospital setting right now, taking care of patients on a daily basis, and that's been a very fulfilling job for me. But being able to, the thing with healthcare is that you can be led to burn out very quickly if you're not careful. And one of the things that has really helped me to regain passion in the career and also be aware of potential burnout is tapping into my creativity. And for me, creativity is so important to push myself to even grow further and try out new things. And it's just been a fun challenge for me that keeps me motivated and entertained.
You know, I always like to start off with defining the terms. So before we begin throwing creativity around, I'd like to know how you personally define it.
Yeah, well, that's a tough one. And I'm glad that you say personal definition, because I think everybody has a different idea of what creativity is. For me, creativity, the idea to create is just part of who I am as a person. When I look at words that are related to create, I think of like life. Life is creation. And being able to share my love for something is part of creativity. And it's also how I connect with other people is through my creativity, is to bring a lot of people together through a shared love for something. It's a very abstract idea on what creativity is, I think. What about you? What's your definition?
I shared with you my background. My original education was in English and art. So writing and actually painting and drawing, those were things I loved to do, to make. For me, creativity, it is the act of kind of going inside yourself and, let's see if I can do this clearly, kind of looking inside yourself and pulling together everything that you've encountered and making something new from it. It's synthesis that results in a new thing, whether it's building on something existing, whether it's totally brand new. We could probably argue there's nothing new under the sun, and yet, how does everything that I encounter around me in the world, in reading, other people, how does all of that end up having a connection to my internal process or a person's internal process where something is birthed from it.
Yeah.
When we were kind of warming up, I talked about that I realized many years ago that it's very important for me to make things, whether it's like a paper collage or dinner or preserves, that I need there to be work of my hands. So not every act of creativity results in a physical product, but that's a large part of it for me.
Yeah.
Is how am I using my hands in the world?
I can relate to that very much. There is an urge inside me to create all the time.
Yeah.
It's almost very, very annoying sometimes if I'm not making something or thinking about making something. It just always is there. And for a very long time, I had pushed that aside because I thought, well, I'm going into pharmacy and creativity can only exist in a different box. I'm going into the pharmacy box. There's no way that the two can be merged together, or there's no middle section anyway that I can do both, which is a very incorrect way of thinking, because that's absolutely not true. But I didn't know that at the time. So I left creativity behind for almost 10-15 years as I pursued pharmacy. I didn't leave it behind completely because I'd always wanted to make things. Like I would always DIY something. Yeah. But there is a portion of myself that I really left behind, because right before pharmacy, since the age of 11, since like the beginning of the internet for me, I had always made something, a website of some form, or created a blog or did something. Like I had always done that. Yeah, I think I made my first website when I was 11. For example, wow. Like someone saw that I was wanting to make a website, and they sat me down and taught me HTML code. And I think I was in 6th, 7th grade. And so this is something that was always been very innately in me. It's just that I thought when I go into pharmacy school that I had to leave all of that behind, which looking back, I'm sad that I thought that, but I'm really glad that I'm able to find my way back to it, which that's what they say. If, you let something go and then it comes back, it's meant to be. I don't know
It is.
If it's, I don't know how accurate that statement is, but I experienced that with creativity for sure.
I'm really glad that you're highlighting, you're keying on that there's this perception that science and art don't have anything to do with each other. That creativity and like a clinical practice are totally disconnected. Because I think that's actually a harmful mindset for us to have. That I believe they are closely linked. And I was thinking about this, like, is creativity a spectrum? Is it something else? And I don't think it happens on a spectrum. I think it is an innate part of humanity that we make things. And that's rather than thinking that creativity is artistic ability, we have to divorce that and find how to weave it in. And one of the reasons I'm so curious to keep talking to you is because I think you are managing to do that.
Well, I think that a lot of people in healthcare, and especially in clinical practice, we have very strict guidelines and structures that we have to follow. And I think because of that, it diminishes our ability to create outside of what is already established for us. And I think maybe that's why a lot of us in clinical practice or in healthcare think that we're not creative, despite maybe creating a new protocol for your workplace. There's always some sort of guidelines or specifications that you have to be, that you have to follow, and maybe that's where it kind of falls off a bit, creativity in a way. But the idea to create a new protocol is in a way creativity. So maybe there is a spectrum, but some of that creativity is stifled because of all of the regulations that is in healthcare.
Yeah. Well, and we could probably look at other highly regulated industries, flight, nuclear power, and have very similar conversations that, I can't play with how I do X procedure because it's high risk.
You cannot.
Yeah.
Yes. But I think a lot of clinicians use that thinking process and apply it to every process of their work life in their professional life. And that's probably where what you're saying, that's where the detriment happens, is you apply that to every component of your professional experience, and that's where you get into problems there.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about some of the key skills and attributes in clinical work, but also if I think about the pilots that I know. My husband's been a guest very early on in the podcast, and we talked about his time in the nuclear Navy. I think it's redefining what we say is a creative act. Like, critical thinking is so important for clinicians and people in almost every industry, honestly. I think critical thinking is a creative act. Because
you have to be very creative sometimes.
Yeah, and it's synthesizing the information you have and producing a decision, an idea, a choice.
Totally.
So
totally.
Yeah, I think that's the work right now, is to say, what are the bounds of creativity? And they're not necessarily the way that we've thought of them traditionally. Right.
Yeah, very true. And I'm glad that you're bringing that up, because if you think of it that way, people are very creative in every way. And I think that healthcare providers do sell themselves short of their skills. They're very much focused on, this is my task. I'm helping a patient. I'm healing them, or whatever it might be. But that process, you do have to be very creative. You have to think about if even a medical resident is reaching out to another specialty for a consult. How do I make my argument so that they will take on this case? That is creativity in its own. As a pharmacist making recommendations to a group of physicians, depending on who I'm talking to, I'm going to adjust the way that I speak or the way that I make my recommendations so that they will buy into my recommendations. That is a way of creativity as well. So we're using our abilities to adapt in various areas, and that is a huge component of that.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to your personal definition of creativity, Sue, about making connections. And it can be
sharing what I love.
Yes. And it can be like, hey, I love this bread recipe, right? Or it can be my passion, the thing that I think is best for this patient, 100%. The love that I have for this other person, even if it's not romantic or otherwise, but just, you're in my care, I will demonstrate love to you. I want to connect that other practitioner to the idea that I've created of what could be best for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Definitely.
I love that.
Yeah. I didn't even think of it that way either, but the way that you say it, it's very true. And, I think if maybe practitioners or clinicians think of it more that way, it will help them to release some of this rigid idea of what their career might be.
I've been doing some writing and training, providing training on change leadership recently. I won't go into all the details of that framework, but this month we've been focusing on choice. The work of a leader during change is to one of the many things that they're responsible for. One of the things that's really vital is to define the conditions of change. That there are things that as the employee involved in this, whether it's a huge change or even a day-to-day simple thing, you have to define, this is what's required of you, the things that must be done or must stop being done. But then also, outside of the responsibility, where does freedom exist? Within the bounds of the work, whether it's the regulation or the job description or a law, what must we do to get the job done? And where do you have freedom, employee? And that's one of the responsibilities that leaders have. And I think that we can talk about creativity in that same way, that it's, as a leader, an employer, am I very clear about what's required of you? And am I also very clear about where you have freedom of choice? And that we make certain that freedom is really a playground for employees.
Yeah.
And that becomes where creativity can live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing is more stifling than to only be able to follow a specific protocol or only follow a specific thing at your workplace if you don't have the freedom to also kind of play around with what's available.
That's one of my questions as we were preparing. I think we are saying we believe that people are naturally creative, but there's the possibility of becoming more creative, of developing it, like any muscle, if you will. And also, if you work in a field or a role that doesn't allow for a lot of creativity, how do you incorporate it into other aspects of your life?
Yeah.
Those are kind of two questions that I'd like to ask of you, is how do you develop creativity, particularly if you've been telling yourself, your entire adult life, I'm not creative.
It's weird. People say that to themselves all the time.
Right?
I have a podcast myself, and it's I have a co-host, and her name is Sally, and she's always coming to me with ideas, but she's always like, "But I'm not a creative person," and I'm like, "What do you mean? You're coming up with new ideas. You're making big things happen. How is that not creative? I don't understand." I always tell her that you are creative. Maybe I have a different way of looking at her ideas. So let's say Sally comes to me and she says, "I would love to be able to interview these people for this topic because their stories are so cool." And then I would say to her, "Yeah, I think that's a great idea. How about we group them in this way?" So for me, my creativity is how do we organize the ideas so that it comes out in a way that audience would like it? But her idea is also a great one where she's like, "I'm being inspired by something and I think we need to do this." For her, she thinks that because she's producing the idea that is not creative because I'm the one that's organizing the idea. But we're both doing something new here and we're both creating something. And I rely on her to be the one to give me the original idea so that I can then package it in a way that is more exciting and fun, I guess, so we're both creative in that route. It's just that she's not giving herself the credit for it, which I don't know why. But back to your question though, about how do I allow myself to infuse more creativity in my work, especially if my job itself does not allow for that opportunity. For me, I used social media, and that's where I'm able to write different things that I'm inspired by. So I share a lot of patient care stories to hope to educate other people and also inspire other people to go into the field of pharmacy or to make changes in pharmacy, to advocate for pharmacy. So I'm using the experience that I have on a day-to-day, and I think about that experience and then I share it with others. And it's a passion of mine to be able to, inspire others to do many great things. So it's really helped when you're doing the same things over and over and over again at work and you're dying for some extra spark in your life. That's where I put a lot of that spark, is writing online and sharing my stories with others. And I have a podcast too, so obviously it's even more sharing and more telling stories and, bringing people together through that connection.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that you've said that I'm kind of crazy excited about because they're so naturally part of this conversation, and I originally had not thought of them. So you've like inspired, there's this little spark.
Okay.
I would love to talk about co-creation with you because you have a co-host, and you and she, is it Soleil? Is that correct?
Sally. Yeah. Sally.
That you and she are making things together, and co-creation is an opportunity to practice creativity. I also love the idea of how do we bring stories to the forefront, because it's another just human drive. Storytelling is, it's an important part of making connections. Storytelling is beginning to surface as a really key leadership skill. And I think that's one way that we can help people understand that they are creating when they tell the stories of their lives, of their work, their families, fill in the blank. Talk to us a little bit more then, if you would, about how you work with someone else in specifically to create your podcast with another person. How is that creative?
I think this is so funny because I don't know. I don't think I've ever really talked about partnerships with somebody else on a different podcast other than our own. So if Sally is listening, hi. I'm going to be saying some really nice things about you, so just be ready. I've always wanted to do a podcast since when I first listened to Serial, and I absolutely love the idea of telling stories. So 2014 was when I first pitched my podcast or a podcast idea to a friend of mine. I said, hey, we have fun conversations together. We should do a podcast. She did not see the same. She was not interested in doing anything like that. So then moving forward, I kind of dove right into pharmacy, didn't do anything creative or any creative endeavors outside of pharmacy for a very long time. I was having another really interesting series of conversations with another friend of mine. I said, hey, we need to record these conversations because I think it can really help other people. And it got a little bit closer. She was a little bit more interested than my previous friend, but it still didn't happen. I started to create my own LinkedIn Live events just on my own, hosting different people. And Saleh was also doing the same. We met through our career coach, and I actually reached out to her to be on her podcast for an episode. So right after that was when I guess she had this idea that we should do a podcast together. And we always laugh telling this story of her writing me this long list of things that we could do at 2 a.m. She was up with her baby and she decided, okay, I'm going to pitch this idea to Theo, because if I don't do it, then I'm going to miss out on opportunity here. So she did that. And I always think it's so interesting is that whole full circle moment. I'm like pitching podcast ideas to so many people, and finally someone pitched an idea to me. And it immediately I said yes, because it was a no-brainer that we would do great. At the same time, we have a lot of similarities. She's got more business experience and she's just a much fiercer business leader than I am. I'm much more of a creative soul, like daydreaming about things. We really, I think, complement each other in that way. And I appreciate her so much. For her to dream so big, it's allowing me to also dream just as big. It's been really cool because she'll come to me with an idea. I get to also make the decision of, does this align with what we're trying to do? And does it fit with our mission, vision, value for the brand and the podcast? So I'm very focused on the value that we bring into the content that we make. And she's very focused on the business side of things. It's been a really cool experience to get to work with somebody else. And we're both bringing what we're really good at and allowing it to infuse in this way that is becoming something that I wouldn't be able to do myself, but I don't think she would be able to do herself either. So it's been really phenomenal. I've also learned so much about what it means to be a partner in business, as well as giving the other person space when they need to. I'm going to let her take lead, and I will continue to reach out and ask if she needed my support, but I'm not going to, I'm going to let her take that. And then I have my own thing that I need to take. So we're working separately, but we're also working together. And but yeah, just like any partnership, I think communication is key, and there's always stuff that you need to kind of hone in on and making sure that you're both on the same page with things. And it's all that part, in romantic relationships and friendships and whatever, it's always, you always need to work on that. It's been fun. It's been such a interesting experience, and I'm absolutely loving each moment. Not to say, though, that having a podcast is this easy thing that, it's for the faint of heart, because it really isn't, in my opinion. It's you're in it for the long game, and you have to be okay with not seeing results immediately, I think, which is something I struggle with so much. I'm always like, Sally, that last episode didn't do so well. Like, we need to change our strategy completely. And she's like, just wait, just wait. It translates so much into my clinical practice. I work in an acute care hospital. She works in ambulatory care. Yeah, we have this ongoing joke of like, I'm in acute care. So if I want to see blood pressure go down, we need to see it go down tomorrow. Whereas she's in ambulatory care and she's managing chronic diseases over years and years. So she's doing something with diabetes, and that you may not see results in 3 months. I would not be able to do that. I need to see results now. I want to see something happening today. So that personality too comes into the partnership. Yeah, we're really helping each other grow. We're
fabulous.
I know it's been a fun experience, and I'm really blessed to have this experience at this time as well.
Yeah. So we've mentioned your podcast, but we haven't called it out by name yet.
Yeah. The podcast is Hey RX Friends, We Got This, which is a very long title.
It is, but it's so fun.
It's a fun one. And initially when we started creating this podcast, we thought we were going to do like a one word, like verified, because pharmacists verify medication.
Yeah, that's fun too. But
it's been taken, like it was, everybody had the word verified in the title, and we're like, oh man, what should we call it? It took us forever, and we wanted it to feel like something that's a community, and we wanted to bring people together. And Hey RX Friends, We Got This is something that we say to each other all the time. And so we just felt like it was a good fit. So check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever.
I loved everything that you've said about your partnership, and there's I'm seeing some fun analogies in what you've shared. Like you talked about the different care settings that you and your partner are in, and you've also talked about your personalities and how those balance each other. And maybe it's a connection that I'm forcing, but our personalities are kind of like the setting for where we're creating, right? Do I need to see, am I somebody that's driven by immediate results? Am I somebody that's driven by, long-term outcomes? And understanding that, having self-awareness can help you then in what am I attempting to create? Does it fit within the setting?
And you can change that about yourself. I mean, I'm so much better now about, okay, this reel or this thing that I just created is not getting the view that I wanted it to get, but that's okay, because I'm looking at the bigger picture down the road now. I'm not as freaked out about it as much, or maybe freaked out's not the right word. I'm just not as like in tune with it. I'm not always wanting to change things right away, because I've seen a growth, and it's been a very slow, but it's been a steady growth of listenership. And just seeing that, I'm like, we're doing something. And I think I mentioned this to you before we started recording, but one of the most fulfilling thing is that I would listen back to the episodes that we published, and I would actually really enjoy those episodes. And I would think to myself, that's a great episode. And you don't always get that. And so for me to just be really proud of the things that I've put out is its own reward.
I agree. I was actually thinking about that part of our pre-record conversation too, when you were talking about like, oh, maybe it's not getting the viewership. There is value sometimes in making things just for yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that either of us are putting our podcasts out into the world for ourselves. It's not a self audience, if you will, one. But can you reflect on it and feel pride that you've created something? Yeah. And I think that's 100% really, really important part of the creative process.
I used to feel, I still fear of failure. I fear failure and rejection probably the most out of anything. Fear and rejection is like, that is social media. You put your stuff out and no one watches it. That is massive rejection. It's almost like I'm going through exposure therapy in a way, because I even if something doesn't do well, I just keep going. I just look past it and I keep going. Despite all the self-doubt, despite all the negative talk that's in my head, I just keep pushing that publish button and continue to try to learn to be better and better in the next one. And so I told Sally the other day, I said that I'm in my rejection era right now because I'm willing to put myself out there to be rejected over and over and over again and feeling okay with that rejection. It's actually been really freeing to put myself in those situations, reach out to somebody that may never respond to me, reach out in a very direct way, reach out in a very in a way that I might have been scared to before. But also rejecting things and people that are not going to benefit, or not benefit, but that do not align with me, or that I see harm in interacting with them. And that just don't have time for it. So rejection can go both ways, but I'm in my rejection era, and putting out my podcast is part of that. Just continuously doing it without fearing that other people may judge me for it, or that nobody's going to listen, because I believe in it. I believe in what I do, and I believe in myself. So reject me all you want. I'm gonna get the results that I want.
I really love that, Thu. I think you're demonstrating one of the big values, one of the big benefits of creativity, of practicing creativity, is the impact it can have on self-confidence, but also self-assurance and belief in your own abilities.
It's very true. Yeah. I don't think I would have gotten here if I hadn't taken this side road, I guess, of creating and trusting myself enough to put out the content that I know is valuable and that I myself would find interesting.
It tells us the story that creativity is bravery.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to keep pushing publish, that means that you will be sometimes rejected, that you will more often than not experience failure.
Yeah. Especially on LinkedIn. When I started writing on LinkedIn, I was very focused on telling patient stories, but I knew that if I were going to continue writing on LinkedIn, that I didn't want to be put in another box. I've been put in so many boxes my whole life. I just didn't want to be like forced to only write about patient cases on LinkedIn, even though I'm getting so many responses to that. I'm getting a lot of really good feedback from sharing these types of stories. But I started then sharing my stories about being a pharmacist, not just patient care, but what it's like to go through healthcare as a person, and navigating through the corporate structure, and navigating through the professional life as a healthcare provider. And initially, when I first kind of made that pivot, there was a huge dip in interest in my post. And it made me step back and say, oh no, am I going to lose my, when you first start creating and when you first start putting your stuff out, you're always going to fear this, like, am I going to lose people? Am I going to say something and nobody wants to hear that, and they just go and look somewhere else? It's the belief in yourself, again, that what you're writing is meaningful. And if it's not meaningful to other people, it's meaningful to you. And hopefully then you will be able to reach people who will find your work as meaningful as you do. And then that's when you're going to find the audience that is looking for you. And I think just speaking to you right now, Kate, it just makes me feel like I've grown so much just by creating. Just by trusting myself to put out the content that I do put out. Yeah. And it's weird. I've never thought that would happen. I full on don't know. We also talked about how you said that this is like your third life or something.
Yes. Oh gosh, I turned 49 in January, which is, for some reason, the 9s are the years that I have a little bit of panic about. Like 50, that's fine. But the last year of the decade always makes me a little...
Oh, that's true.
But I think about, all the different versions of myself. I've probably been like 7 Kates at this point. And it's kind of this constant new creation as you go through life.
Yeah, I'm definitely in a new era and new renaissance of my life as well right now. And it's come from just putting myself out there and being okay with rejection, being okay with failing.
Yeah.
And it's still a process. I'm not always okay with it. It's still in my head. You know, I'm still like nervous about it. But despite the nervousness, I just do it.
Yes.
And that's the difference.
That's exactly right. And I do think that that's a sign of growth, because we will fail. Human error, mistakes, bad choices are inevitable. And if you don't experience that, you're not growing, right?
Yeah.
You have to get to a point where it's, yep, I feel the fear and I'm going to do it anyway.
It's terrifying, but it's
it really is.
It's okay.
As we're talking about growth, which was one of the very first things that I wrote down as a note, it has me thinking that creativity is learning. It's not just making, it's the process that allows us to learn how to be different in our worlds.
Different. What do you mean by different?
Well,
like stand out?
No different than who I was yesterday.
Oh.
You know, like it is it's an act of learning and growth. That creativity is an act of learning and growth. I think what I'm trying to say.
No, you're very right. Creativity for me, one of the words that I use to define it is life. You are created by something. And so if you continue to grow, that is continuous creation of who you are. Yeah. And so that is part of creativity, I think.
I agree. One of the words you used that I captured was inspiration. That you want to be able to inspire people. And I do think that is closely tied, because inspire is breath.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it all connects.
Yeah, it is. We need to breathe in our lives.
When I started out writing on LinkedIn, I didn't really have, I think a lot of people are motivated by different things. I am motivated by recognition. I want to be recognized.
Okay.
I want to be able to, at the end of my professional career, that I could say I've made an impact somewhere, and I want to be recognized for that. I think that would be, like, if you had a selfish reason, that would be my selfish reason. I want to be recognized, and I want to be recognized for the positive things that I've done for the profession. And in order to do that, you have to be creative. In order to do that, you're going to have to create new ways to do things. Making an impact is creativity. Yeah. You can't just keep doing whatever that's already been done and expect to make some sort of significant change or an impact.
I agree. And I would like to say, not to debate or argue or say you're wrong, but I don't think recognition is necessarily a selfish motivation. It's a very human need.
Yeah.
And I like bringing recognition into this conversation because it's a leadership responsibility as well. That how are we people that want to lead, and it doesn't always mean have a title of leader or manager or executive, but people who lead give recognition. And
I love that.
And if you are fostering creativity on your team in your workplace, from whatever your leadership position is, there should naturally be recognition that follows that. Even if it's simply I see that, or thank you, it's involved. So
that's very true.
I do think that if we're going to talk about creativity, we do have to talk about recognition.
Yeah, I've definitely been in a workplace where the work that I've done was not recognized as much as I had hoped for. Not that I need a lot of positive feedback or that I need recognition, but recognition is something that really motivates me, and I'm sure motivates a lot of people to keep going. So I I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it's a huge difference from going from one place where I'm doing all this work and I'm not really receiving any appreciation versus going somewhere else where people are really excited for the work that I've done and receiving that appreciation. There is a much different response that I have.
I want to turn the conversation a little bit to a subject I know that you're really passionate about, and it's preventing or reducing burnout in the pharmacist population. So here's my word nerd activity going on. I'm having like these word associations.
I love it.
Burnout is like when there's no more fuel, right? It's just this crispy thing. But we've also talked about creation and life.
Yeah.
And I think, just as I posited in the introduction, that I think creativity is a skill that we need to have on teams because there are so many new problems facing us in the world and in the workplace. I think creativity can also be part of the solution to addressing the burnout epidemic that we're seeing, not just in healthcare, but across the whole workforce.
Yeah, I can see that.
How do you think we can make creativity the solution to burnout, or part of the solution?
That's a good point. It really depends. I think it really depends on why somebody burned out. I think for me, the pandemic really accelerated my burnout. So I to be honest, I don't quite know. I just know that one of the reasons why Sally and I have a podcast to help pharmacists not feel so alone and to burn out so quickly is that we promote a lot of ideas that, your job is not who you are. It's just what you do.
Yeah.
So don't bond yourself to this profession to the point where you're going to lose who you are. And so we focus on that so much. But in terms of creativity and how it can help people, it really depends what motivates them, I think. If there's someone like me that feels like they have so much like this like thing, and I don't even know how to describe it, if they feel like there's just this like urge inside them to break out and do something different and unique, that could be a source of putting a lot of energy into that, and then that will like fuel your motivation to keep going. But I really don't know, and I've never even really thought about that, because for me burnout is such a systemic issue that I always think of it more of like on a systemic level, how do you help people to feel better about things? And that's why, like I said, the podcast that I have, it's very focused on like take care of yourself and be okay with the mistakes and be okay with the failure. But yeah, I don't know if you have any suggestions about that.
I have ideas, and I have a story I want to tell.
Oh,
I think so.
Yeah.
I mentioned to you during our quote unquote warm up that I had this aha moment about 15, 16 years ago, that I do have the need to have product. I have this make drive, and I had forgotten it. And I was the reason I know, like, okay, this was 2008 is because it was a time of really intense work stress for everybody I was working with. I was a part of an organization that had been acquired, and it was one of the most intense professional experiences I've ever had. And I was totally burnt out. I had gone past the point of burnout to just being charcoal.
Oh no.
At that same time, I belonged to a CSA, a community supported agriculture farm. And one of the things that you could do for your share rather than pay was to go spend time on the farm and do chores. And I got to schedule my work share time in the early spring, and I spent 3 hours one morning in a greenhouse potting seeds. Some people may say that wasn't a creative act. But when I left, as I was driving home, I realized this is the most centered and peaceful I have felt in months, if not in a year. And it was because I had spent time not in my head, but with my hands making something. And I think that if we create more opportunities, because so much of work these days involves thought, which is powerful and amazing, but it doesn't always put something into the world that's physically present and new. That I think if we could have more moments and opportunities for people to do things like pot seeds, that we could heal ourselves in some real ways. And I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I do know, because I've talked to other people about, hey, I had this experience, or I've recognized in myself the need to produce stuff, to handiwork. And I've talked with other people that are like, oh, same.
I mean, I do sourdough, so it's kind of similar.
Yeah, exactly.
Ish, kind of.
It is. Yeah. And it's why I think that creativity doesn't just mean art. That's, I think, why we tie it together, because art is a physical product. Baking is creativity. You're making something.
Yeah, I do bake a lot when I'm stressed.
Yeah.
It does something to help with my anxiety, I think.
I think maybe that's something that we need to examine. And you're right, burnout is a systemic issue. And it's also an individual human issue.
Very much so, yeah. I think that's a really great thought, though. But I almost feel like that's why people recommend exercising and movement, because you're supposed to release a lot of that anxiety through your body. Because, I think there's a lot of information out there now that the body holds a lot of trauma.
Well, breath. Again, breath. There's
yeah.
Even just breath work.
Even breathing. Yeah.
I'm loving this conversation too. Thank you.
I love your ability to look at words. I think that that's so fascinating. That's something that I would never even think of, and that's your own form of creativity. Just then is being able to see certain words and then correlate it with other words, and that's really cool.
Thank you.
That's a beautiful art.
Thank you. That is recognition that I really love receiving. Thank you.
I love it.
Just tie it all back together, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, what else? What have we not yet talked about? Particularly, like, what is something that you really want to say, and if we don't cover it, you'll be mad at me forever?
Oh, that's a great way to put that. I want to, I guess a couple of things came up when you were talking about being able to produce a product, because in healthcare, the product is the patient leaving and feeling better or reaching their goals in some way. So that's something that I definitely thought of. But one thing that I really hope other healthcare providers, and especially pharmacists who are listening, is to, in terms of creativity, it can look like so many different things. You can implement a new service. You can see an issue in your own department, maybe a process problem, and find ways to fix it. Because I've just worked with one too many people who see that there's a problem, and then when you say, hey, did you notice that there's this issue that's happening? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, and are we doing something about it? And shockingly, a lot of times it's no. And that to me is the shocking part, because for me as a person who I'm not like a problem solver, but I love to improve things. So again, it's the whole, I want to make an impact. If I see a problem, I'm going to try to fix it. So it's always so shocking to me that there are people in the field who sees the problem and kind of just let it go. But being part of creativity is trying to find a solution. Whether that solution is the right one or not, it's not the point. The point is finding this motivation in yourself to say, let me try to fix it.
What you're talking about is you can't just see a problem. That lacks creativity to just look and see. That the thinking then has to turn into action. The people that just see problems and don't then take responsibility is probably the best way to talk about it for imagining what the solution could be. Those are people that lack creativity, probably.
I have a feeling that they're not very satisfied in their own work.
Yeah.
Because there is that lack of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
But creativity doesn't have to go all the way back, and I guess to tie up everything, it doesn't have to be this art form. It doesn't have to be this big thing that you put online and other people enjoy it. It could simply just be very small solutions to small problems, but then over time it actually will lead into a much better process. Even really basic things, like one thing that I notice is if someone tells me, hey, we need to make this change because this is the problem and try to fix it. If someone explains it to me, then I can then make a point to fix or to follow the protocol. And so then I realize, if maybe anytime we make a change and we change the way that we communicate to the rest of us why this change needs to happen, more people would comply. It's like just a small little thing that I noticed, but when you do notice there's more compliance and you're like, oh, look at that. Like I did something very tiny, but then it makes me happy to see that I'm doing something for the department.
Well, you're talking about connecting people to the why. I want to correct something I said, by the way. I said those people lack creativity because I think that's not the right way to talk about it. One of the points that I think we've made that here is that creativity is about life. So people don't lack creativity. It's that they don't exercise it.
Yeah, I think that's a better way.
I can connect it to talking about when changes happen. One of the things that those decision makers or the people that are communicating about the decisions, part of making it a reality is creating understanding.
Yeah, everything is, you're tying it back. You're tying everything back into creativity. I love it. You're right. Very true.
That's where I want people to get, is where they understand that so many parts of what they do every day is creation, and the satisfaction and the peace and the energy that can come from that is such an important part of well-being. But I think of living the type of lives that I personally want people to have.
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm probably obnoxiously vocal about you're creating.
I think that's, just my last point is when you start to see people losing motivation. I've seen so many of my coworkers just getting resentful of their jobs, and you see that there's lack of motivation. It's not because of them, it's just they've let go of that ability to create where they are. And that's probably where you'll see that decline of interest in what they do, which is sad because, if you work 8 hours a day, that's a third of your day.
Yeah.
That's a third of your life. And you want to always have a spark somewhere, and we can still create that spark, and hopefully people can bring creativity back into all the little things that they do on a daily basis, and bring more of that spark back, because it is all about creating. It is all about creativity, life, and inspiration and connection. I love all of those words. I love it.
Well, I love that you're connecting motivation as a metric to understand if people are missing out on being able to create or co-create their work environment. So they think about what we understand about motivation at work: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Do I have agency to be able to make decisions to create something within my environment? Am I able to exercise and build muscle, if you will? And then purpose. Am I connected to the why? I love having motivation built into the conversation we're having. And I think it's a good place for us to kind of put a full stop because because motivation it's intrinsic to individual work, and it's an important thing for leaders to measure and monitor.
Very cool. I love it. Yeah, this was a very insightful conversation for sure.
I've had such a wonderful time. Just like all the wheels. I feel like my brain is
boy,
like 100
Yeah.
kilowatts right now. Just everything's alight, and I'm so grateful
love
for
it,
that.
though.
Thank you.
No, but right before we started recording, I was also telling you that my brain has been churning quite a bit recently too, and creation, baby.
Sue, we've talked about your podcast, and I
Yeah.
know that you've got, in addition to your full-time job working in acute care, what else do you have going on right now?
Well, right now I am definitely journeying into entrepreneurship more seriously. Hoping to make even a bigger impact in the world of healthcare. I've recently realized that, hey, people who see a problem, people come up with a solution, and so can I.
Yeah.
So that's all kind of working in the background right now. But Hey RX Friends, We Got This is also another passion of mine. I've been really enjoying that journey so far. And I hope you all check it out, learn more about me and my partner, Saleh, and kind of our experience as women of color in pharmacy and what that looks like. I mean, even our names are different, and that has affected the way that other professionals look at us. We talked about embracing failure, and we really dive into the fact that if you listen to the episode, Saleh almost failed out of pharmacy school, and
Oh, wow.
I didn't match initially for a residency, but we both overcame it. So our stories are meant to be shared, and our stories are meant to bring people together, and that's that's been a really, really fun experience so far. But yeah, please check us out. Go to our Instagram, because you'll get to see more about like what we do and our big goals and our big dreams and our big plans for it. So
I've checked out a couple of your reels, and the chemistry that you and your co-host have, it's so fun to watch. So I highly recommend it. And not just for people, in the profession. I think there's a lot for us lay folk as well.
We have a link tree, so you can just link that.
Beautiful.
But being able to do your own thing has been a very beautiful thing. I mean, it's also, there's no straight path for it, so it can be very frustrating, but it also means that there's so much room to play. There's so much opportunity to do so many fun things when you have so much freedom.
I agree. There is fear involved in it, because you're making it up as you go along in so many ways. But yeah, there's also so much room for play. I think we need more of that in our lives.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time, Theo. I've had just a blast. I hope this has been not just conversational for you, but also fun. Thank you again.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.